Now, behind every missing person, countless more people suffer from the anguish and uncertainty of not knowing the fate and whereabouts of their loved ones. To recognize the number of people missing and to show solidarity with the loved one, the International Day of the Disappeared on August 30 of each year is created to draw attention to the fate of individuals imprisoned in places and under poor conditions unknown to their relatives and all legal representatives. News Central's Niyi Omoniyi has more on this.
Voices, faces, these are not just numbers, but souls in flight, disappearing.
I can't see her anywhere. I can't see her.
If losing a child for just a few minutes feels like this, imagine missing them for years, many as a result of war, persecution, conflict, violence, natural disaster, or even migration. Families could suffer physically, emotionally, financially, and even socially.
Angama biyiro an la yik an dong pere. Abita gwoga ye mwera nyo pere ye mwera an.
All this comes back to the brain and the heart, which we need to talk about it.
The modern weapons are there. The fights are taking place in the middle of the villages and the towns. The control is very difficult nowadays.
There are over 35 active armed conflicts in Africa today, and in most violent cases, the financial commitments that families have to make to facilitate the search for a missing person becomes so great that they have to choose between moving on and searching for their loved ones.
Sharing this kind of talk with the families of the missing really helps a lot. When they started coming, some people can cry. It's very emotional.
Okwe chwinya oweko benek idiewo aramo nino mano chwinya yom.
According to the latest figures shared by the International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC, 64,000 cases of disappeared persons have been reported across Africa, with Nigeria accounting for over 25,000, more than half of which are children. The task of finding and reuniting missing people with their families can be strenuous, as the loved ones are usually stuck, waiting in an endless cycle of non-adaptive thoughts that intensifies as time goes on.
We use public information, going in communities, use the radio, leaflets and such. And then we have the names of the missing people and we get descriptions of who they are, what they are. We distribute information in places where people have fled to.
While many missing persons may never return or be heard from again, their loved ones must find a way to move on.
I really do wish and I pray that one day they'll find closure, because it is one thing to find a person and another thing not to even find the person.
At a time when the world feels so tough and anyone could be a victim, the protection of civilians, especially during conflict, is imperative. For the loved ones still searching, some say time might not fill the void, but the little act of kindness from people around them can help them through the process. Niyi Omoniyi, reporting for News Central.
Joining me to discuss this story and two gentlemen. First, Deji Ajari, who's the Executive Director of Sterling Law Center and the Content Director at Initiative for Legal Literacy and Advocacy, Samuel Omotosho. Gentlemen, good to see you both and thanks for your time. Let's start with you, Deji. Human rights defenders and journalists have been the subject of enforced disappearances, pointing fingers at law enforcement agencies. Now, the case of Dadiyata, that's a Nigerian journalist, is still fresh in the minds of many. How can this be addressed?
Very much. Once again, my name is Samuel Motosho, and it's good to join you here today. I'll start by giving a background story to Yaya Dati. Yaya Dati is known to be a very open critic of the government. He's known to be a very open critic. So one day he drove into his premises at night, and then he was abducted, and that was the last that was heard from him. And then it's sad because, he has a wife, he has children, he has a mother, he has a father, and then they cannot they can't hear from him again just because he was an open critic of the government. The government, however, denied every tie linked to Yaya disappearance. They claim that they did not know anything about it. But then there's an African proverb in Nigeria, particularly, that says that a witch cries at night and a child dies in the morning. And then, it's logical to hold the witch responsible. So that is summarily the case of Yaya Dati. However, I would say that the government has to do more. I would say that human rights organization has to do more. Because I'll give the instance of Jones Abiri as a case study. Now, Jones Abiri was also abducted suddenly by men of the DSS. At some point, he was abducted for about 2 years. And after he was released, he was abducted again. However, organizations cried out. A lot of people spoke about it. A lot of people kept on pushing. And then in about a month, he was released. So it boils down to the fact that if people talk about it, if people report offenses, if people keep pressing for it, something will be done about it. But then when we are quiet about it, nothing is going to be done about it. So I think it's expedient that people talk more about it when we notice that the person has disappeared suddenly, and then it can be traced.
Samuel, let me jump in here.
Okay.
Apologies, Samuel. Let me jump in here quickly. There are laid down procedures for arrest. I'm excited for one. You've been able to give us some sense of some of the key issues and some of the key personalities as examples. But one wonders why it's not adhered to, talking about the laid down procedures. Let us in on the alleged concealment of some arrested persons by governments of some African countries.
Thank you very much for that question.
That in Africa, of course.
No, I actually wanted Samuel to go give us a sense of that. I didn't know Deji had joined us. Deji, I'll come back to you. Let's quickly hear Samuel on this, please. Apologies.
Okay, so thank you very much. I'll continue from where I stopped. Now, talking about enforced abduction. We talk about enforced abduction. You find out that the government is trying to hide it from the general public. So because they are trying to hide it from the general public, they don't go through the normal arrest method. Now, when the normal arrest method is done, a citizen is entitled to his fundamental human rights. There is a right to a lawyer as embedded in section 36, sub 66 of the Constitution, where he will not just testify, but he will do that with the provisions of the lawyer by his side, talking about the fact that he's innocent until proven guilty, talk about the fact that he still has his freedom of liberty, he's entitled to bail. Now, the government knows, or those involved, because it's not just the government, we also state actors, they know that if they go through all this, the person might come out clean, because in most instances, such a person is innocent. So they don't want anyone to point accusing fingers to them. They don't want implements of the law. So they avoid all that, and then they abduct the person. So generally, that's what enforced disappearance is all about. Avoiding the law, avoiding the procedure of arrest, avoiding the procedure of proper detention, avoiding the procedure of allowing the person to go through fair trial, and just abducting him and then carrying out the so-called justice themselves.
Let's bring in Deji Ajari here. Deji, thanks for joining us earlier on. The ICRC in Nigeria has said about 14,000 children are missing, and that's mind-boggling. And that's just to talk about the figures that were reported alone. So help us here, if you will, the role of a body like the National Human Rights Commission in Nigeria. What should they be doing in helping to see that this is stopped or reduced?
Thank you for acknowledging the fact that basically we're just going to be able to work with the figure released by ICRC. But I can tell you, as someone who works on the field, that the figure is higher, and at best, what you have from ICRC is a conservative figure. These cases of disappeared children, particularly, is more heightened in areas like in the Northeast and in the Southeast, where the Nigerian military more especially acting under the guise of combating terrorism in the northeast and secessionist activities in the southeast, raid communities, take tons of people and disappear them. Now, of course, disappearance, enforced disappearance in any form is unacceptable. It is criminal, of course, going by the convention. But it is even worse when disappearances are committed against minors. And so one really gets worried when one sees the quality and quantity of people, of minors that have been disappeared. And so you can imagine a child, for instance, who was disappeared at the age of 11 and spends up to a decade, for instance, in the Northeast in disappearance, basically spends his entire teenage years, his entire growing years in a state of disappearance. I think it is something that is really worrisome. Now, unfortunately, while the National Human Rights Commission has been trying its best, but it is not enough. It is important that everyone concerned, all hands, must be on deck to see to an end to enforce disappearance. And it goes not just from the National Human Rights Commission, from the government angle, but it also means there must be legislative steps that will be taken. There will be administrative steps that will be taken. But the judiciary also must be more demanding of the law enforcement agents and other persons who are accused of committing disappearances, in terms of not just permitting them to simply come, because when people are disappeared, particularly by persons that they cannot identify, it's the law enforcement agents simply come, like in the case of that day.
Let me bring in Samuel. Let me quickly bring in Samuel. Now you're talking about law enforcement agencies, and Samuel, you know, security is a major one here, and talking about the civil-military relations, especially in places where the Nigerian military or any of the African forces are having operation. That's a major challenge for the continent, striving to get it right. What other motives or ways do you think that these governments can help, ensure that there's a better relationship between its forces and its civilian population?
Okay, I get your question. The first thing is that those that are guilty of these activities, this enforced disappearance, should be held responsible. Now, when the government is able to hold the military responsible in a situation where it's the military that caused a disappearance, the people will have trust for the government to start with. The people will have trust for the government. And then how can the military be held responsible? We have the Rome Statute section, Article 7 of the Rome Statute makes it criminal, talking about enforced disappearance. There's also the United Nations Declaration on enforced disappearance that makes it criminal. So if the government, in a situation where the military is the cause, if the government can actually make sure that the military stand charges for these activities, the people will trust the government more. And then there are even situations where the government are at fault, and then the International Criminal Court has the jurisdiction to try the government in a situation where government is also at fault for enforced disappearance. So I think it all boils down to punishing those that are the offenders, because that's the only way crime can be perturbed. That's the only way crime can reduce, where those that are committing these offenses are punished.
And Samuel, I meant to say, Deji, what specific actions should African governments, judiciary, law enforcement, and security agencies take to curb this trend?
I have said, for instance, legislative actions that they must take. Those governments that have either acceded to or ratified the convention need to domesticate the convention, and in doing so, they should criminalize acts of enforced disappearances in line with their obligations under the convention. This will give a bite to the fight against enforced disappearance. And of course, there's also the risk that law enforcement and security agencies will not willingly hand over they are operatives who commit acts of enforced disappearance. So the attorney generals of the Federation of the various countries in Africa must also coordinate rigorous assessment of the activities of the law enforcement agencies in order to identify and pressure them to hand over those who have been accused or those who, against whom allegations of enforced disappearances have been made, to independent investigative bodies, such as the National Human Rights Commissions, like you said. And where persons are found to be guilty, on effective investigation, they should be handed over to the appropriate institutions for prosecution. Of course, the heads of these law enforcement agencies too must also be responsible enough to conduct training for their members, to monitor their members' compliance with the provisions of the convention and other laws of war that regulate the handling of prisoners of war and civilian populations, and investigate alleged contraventions of the convention. Now, beyond that, like I spoke about the judiciary must be bold. The judiciary must be demanding. The judiciary must go beyond just listening to just mere denials of custody, but must ask law enforcement agencies accused of disappearances to positively show that it is impossible for them to have custody of such persons, because it will actually place a much
Ajari, I'm afraid we're out of time. DJ Ajari, many thanks for your time, as well as Samuel Omotosho.
Thank you so much for having us this evening.